Okay, so I got drunk a little bit, and I thought, since I was drunk, I may as well do another tack room video. This is my horse skull. My dad dug it up for me on his ranch. Thank you, Dad. And so I'm going to show you some of the stuff about a horse's skull that impacts how bits work and how tack works. So the main thing you want to look at right away is this spot here. And this is where the bit goes. And the bit, regardless of where you're hanging it, it should not be impacting the molars back here, and it should not be contacting your canines or the front teeth. There's a lot of room here. And regardless of if you're doing like 0 wrinkles or 1 wrinkle on the bit, it should all stay within this area and not touch the teeth. So, quick example. Here's the bit, and as you can see, you can move it up and down in the horse's mouth, and still, you're not going to be contacting the teeth. It sits right here, and I'll show you what the bottom jaw looks like. Okay, so here's the bottom jaw, and here you'll see the bars of the jaw, right here and here. And again, if you look at where the bit is sitting, like so, you're going to get pressure on those bars. And of course you've got some soft tissue there, but you can still, these are sensitive. And if you look at horse skulls, especially, older ones, you can see how there will be like bone spurs and bone growth from a lot of pressure coming down on here. And as you can see, it's this thin space, and the tongue would go, up through here. I want to talk about the palate. So here's the top of the skull, and here, sorry, it's full of dirt. Here, if you can see, this is the palate. This is the roof of the mouth. And this is, if you look down through here, you can see that there is a lot of empty space. And this palate, you can't really see, but it's got some, you can actually see through it in some spots, because it's not thick. It's not thick bone, is the main point I'm making. So again, when you have a bit that's putting pressure on the palate, it's got soft tissue, but then it's got bone that's delicate right underneath. And another important thing to note about this upper part of the skull is this nasal bone, the nasal plane. Here you can see the skull. You can see where the nasal bone sits. And I actually broke part of mine because this is really fragile. I can't show you, there's another video on YouTube, but somebody is shining a flashlight through here, and you can see the light through the bone because it's very fragile. And you can see, I don't want to break it, but if you wiggle this, it wiggles. It's really soft tissue, and that's why you always want to fit your nose bands and bitless bridles up at the peak of this, never down here, because that's a lot more sensitive, and there's just like light skin on this, not a lot of sensitive tissue. If you touch a horse's face, you can tell that. You've got a lot of tissue back here, you've got some jowly tissue, but there's not very much except skin on this fragile little nasal plane. Okay. Then putting this guy back together. Whoops. Okay. Out of the way. And so, what was the next thing I was going to point out? I'm going to demonstrate some more bit fit. For example, you can see that this ported bit, you put it up and this right here is where the bars, the flat area of the bit is going, and the port goes up into the horse's mouth between the teeth. And then it's hard to demonstrate. But then when you go like this, if you hear that click is the sound of this cathedral port hitting the roof of the mouth. And again, this is what the cathedral port looks like. These are coming down on the bars, this goes up over the tongue, and then as the shanks are pulled, it goes up into the roof of the mouth, into the palate. Good job. And then one more quick demonstration. Here's a full cheek bit. And here you can see how these, the full cheeks, they press against the whole side of the horse's face. Can't see that super well. But yeah, see how that fits right there. And then you pull it side to side, taking out, it's touching the face more. And then another thing to note is right here, this is where a nerve cluster comes down, and that's another reason why this part of the horse's face is really sensitive, because they've got all these nerves that come branching down, and this is why you see some bridle styles lately that are aiming to avoid this area. And then one last thing is showing about where the bosal fits. You can see it goes like this, and then there would be the knot filling up the space down here. So so then when you go like this, this is coming, and it's on the side of the face, and it's on the nasal bone. And then here, if there was a knot, there's not a knot, there's empty space, but there should be a knot filling right here, and so that's gonna come up. And so those are the main points of the skull: the delicate nasal plane, the thin roof of the mouth, the palate, and then the bars, and this is the area where the bit sits. And one other thing I wanted to demonstrate. A lot of people say things about bits and pieces of tack like, oh, I would never ever want that in my mouth. And for example, you look at my face, look at how long my jaw is. It's not very long compared to how long this jaw is. And if you look, there's a lot of space here. The tongue goes all the way through here, and while the bit sits here, there are a lot of bits that will have something here, a port, like a spade bit, or this cathedral port, which lay flat on the tongue. And while we may look at that and say, oh my gosh, that's so much in the horse's mouth, it has to hurt like a ton, it's not necessarily the case, because the horse has a very different jaw than we do. There's a lot more room in the mouth, which is not an excuse for, packing it full of nonsense, but there is a lot more room here for giving different signals. For example, you can act on the palate, you can act on the tongue, you can act on these bars, you can act on the nose. And so when you see a bit that seems like it's taking up a lot of space in the mouth, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a terrible, awful thing. It can mean that the bit contacts more areas in different ways, which gives the writer the ability to give more cues, which is why you have things like the double bridle, where you've got a snaffle and then you've got a curve. I don't have a good setup for that. but something like, you've got your snaffle, just backwards, and then you've got your curb, and so you have the two sets of reins, and you're getting two different kinds of action on the mouth. And obviously there's a lot of room for that to be harsh. It's a lot for a horse to take in on these delicate tissues of the skull and the soft tissues that lie on top of it, which is why the double bridle is like the top level of a dressage horse. And a spade bit, I have one coming in the mail, but again, a spade bit, it's a little like this, where it's got this big part that's resting on the tongue, and that is like the highest level for a like a bridle horse is what it's called, which is part of the Western vaquero buckaroo tradition, coming out of, you know, cowboy stuff. My throat's really dry. So yeah, that's a little bit about the anatomy of a horse's skull and where the bit goes, and hopefully I'll be able to get more pictures showing the soft tissues and so on. Yeah. Okay.